I'm investigative journalist Molly Barrows. For years, I've covered the stories that made headlines in Northwest Florida and all along the Gulf Coast. Murders, missing persons, and mysteries of all kinds. These cases are far from over for many victims because the full story has yet to surface. Join me for Gulf Coast Confidential, where I dive into the saltier side of the South and expose the lies, greed, and corruption that often weighs down the truth. It's time to turn the tide and get a shot at justice. Hey y'all, I'm Molly Barrows, and welcome to the Gulf Coast Confidential podcast, where we cover some of the most scandalous crimes and cases that bubble up right here in Northwest Florida and beyond. Coming to you live today from the Molly Barrows studios, and we invite you to please like and subscribe if you're watching on our YouTube channel and comment wherever you are listening. And joining me now to talk about these what the feezy type stories, as we call them, is Pam Hill, pharmacist and victims advocate. Those who follow the show are very familiar with Pam, and we are delighted and honored today to have Diamond Jordan with us as well. She is the sister of Tierra, who was murdered in the parking lot of Mugs and Jugs right here in Pensacola back in August of 2023. And Diamond, thank you so much for being here today and talking about this. And as you know, and those who follow the show, we advocate for victims on this program because we feel like their voices often don't get heard. And you are your sister's voice, Tierra Binion, only 25 years old, when Escambia Sheriff's deputies say she was gunned down by another 25-year-old, Christian Ketchup, in the parking lot after he and his girlfriend had a run-in with her in the parking lot. And you got there moments after, and it just breaks my heart when I hear you describe what you found. You lived 2 hours away in Excel, Alabama.
Correct.
Got the call, came down, and it changed your life forever. What's your life been like since she was killed?
Wow. Definitely different. I mean, I feel like I spend the majority of my time advocating for the justice that she deserves. And, like we said earlier, today is my 13-year-old birthday, my 13-year-old daughter's birthday. And here I am, with you advocating, and you definitely make sacrifices.
Why do you feel like it's necessary to advocate for her? Do you not trust the system?
I think it's been very apparent that because she doesn't have a voice, someone has to be. And it's not that we want to take over. It's just that we want to make sure her story is heard.
And I think, Pam, you certainly can relate to that. Your sister, Sharon Adelot, was also murdered by her own son in 2013. He was found not guilty by reason of insanity. And people don't realize, whether it's your situation or your situation advocating for your sister, it's not like it's a one-time event. It's constantly being brought up. In your case, Christian hasn't been tried yet. His girlfriend, who was involved, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute, received basically a slap on the wrist, in your opinion. And I think a lot of people would agree with that. For her role in it, she was only charged with a misdemeanor battery, but it seemed like there could potentially more should have been done, could have been done. And you felt the same way. Brandon's case comes up for evaluation every 6 months to determine if he, meets the criteria for incarceration. Now he's out and moved up to another level, if you will, in the criminally insane process, more towards release. So you understand this frustration of needing to advocate.
Do. And it's all new to us. We've never done this. We don't live like this. There's so much misinformation that comes out, so many things. Still doing this after 11 years, and I'll do it till I die. But because so much of this system is sort of like a Joe lunchbox. People clock in and clock out. A lot of people, it's that to them. It's their job. It is our life. It's our sister. It's our families. It's our futures. And to not speak up would just be the greatest defense in my mind, because we loved our sisters. They were here. And that's what grief is. Grief is searching for where you put that love and to hold the receipt that I loved Tierra. I loved Sharon. So it's just a journey that, unless you've been on this journey, you really can't understand it. And it is hard. There's some days you look and go, did he really kill Sharon? Did they really kill my sister? And everybody goes on and has Wheaties and Pop-Tarts and stuff, and we do this.
Absolutely. I think there are moments in my life where, whether, I turn to my husband or my children or a friend, I'm like, wow, she's really dead, and it's really, just a moment of sadness because you wake up every day and you expect it to just be normal, and it's not normal anymore.
It's different, and you kind of, everything in our lives now is before Tierra's murder, after Tierra's murder, before Sharon's, after Sharon's. And we learn how to speak so flowery and use euphemisms and stuff, and that's what messed up my mind. I had to go to counseling because Sharon didn't die. Tierra didn't die. They were killed.
Brutally.
They were
Both
murdered.
of them.
Absolutely.
Right. For no reason whatsoever, except for someone just has that evilness in them and cannot control themselves.
And decided to take a life.
Right. I woke up this morning, I'm going to kill somebody. You know, that's just so offensive to me. And then people are like, well, get over it. I will never get over it. Diamond will never get over it, but we will get through it.
Absolutely. And, Tierra, I'd love for folks to get to know her a little bit better through you. She was a mother of 2 twin boys. They just turned 6 years old. And you were saying how you guys were pregnant close to the same time. And what was your relationship like with her?
Absolutely. So it was different. And it was different in the way that, we didn't have the flowery childhood that most probably can, familiarize with. We had to work for it, and we had to work for a relationship with each other. I was adopted early on and she was not. And so we had to work to maintain that relationship, but it was worth every single effort that both of us put into it. And so Tierra was like a big sister. My 13-year-old posted a video today and she said, Mom, I want you to read my caption. And in the caption, she had said, Tierra was like my big sister, and I turned 13 today and she's not here. And she said, I'm going to be driving in 2 years and she won't be here. And I still, 2 years later, miss her for all of those moments that she should have been here to witness. And I think for a 13-year-old, just to recognize that she's gone and she's going to miss out on so much it's hard.
And it does. It reverberates through families. Not only did Sharon die, she died at the hands of her own son. So that's domestic violence within your own family. He also took away the mother of his sister as well, Elizabeth Adelot, who's now an adult, but it's fractured your relationship as well. And it's difficult. It's not just losing your sister. It impacts your entire families.
Definitely.
Absolutely. It strains, I think, relationships and then builds others. So.
Definitely. And it even affects the parents. To me, the hardest, I know how heartbroken and how just fragile I am sometimes. And I think about my mom and dad. That was their baby, and I know that you have similar feelings and thoughts about that too, because you just can't wrap your head around this still. And the fact that other people can relate, that's the reason we do this show, is because you're out there floating by yourself a lot of times, going to grief counseling or something, some sort of way. If death is kind of expected, you pre-grieve a little bit, and that's hard too. But when it's unexpected, unnecessary,
And violent.
particularly violent and heinous and savage and whatever words you can put with it, and that someone walking around thinks, hey, I did this, but I can stand up and say I'm not guilty. What is wrong with you?
I know. And that's what happened with your nephew, Brandon. Voices were talking to him. He was found with schizophrenia, but as we've talked many times in different episodes, there's more to that. He was using drugs at the time and selling it, and that contributed to his mental state. And so is he completely unresponsible in the eyes of the law? Maybe. But then when I think about Christian Ketchup, and we're preparing for his trial, he has a court date coming up December 18th, and you will be there, like you were there at all his court hearings, as well as his co-defendant, Rachel DeRise. But, I think about that. He is already trying to find, and you can talk a little bit more about it in detail, but a mental health expert that will basically defend him and excuse him. And it's what it is to me, in my opinion, is that it's an excuse that you give to say, yeah, sure, I emptied my gun of 10 bullets into her body, but I didn't mean to. I mean, that's almost the way it comes across. How do you, but I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah,
how do you feel about it?
Well, and first I'd like to touch on what Pam had said about, death is expected. I told you guys both last time that we talked that I expected it to be my grandmother whenever I got that phone call. We expect for our elderly to pass away, but we never expect for someone 25 years old, full of life, a mother of 2, to just be here 1 minute and then gone the next. And so, for me, I think it's an insult. It's an insult to justice to even pretend like there's some story that you want to come up with that possessed you to do this crime. And it's all about accountability, his lack of accountability. And I told Rachel and her family that. Had they just said, you know what, we took part in this and we're sorry. that would have meant something. Not much, but it would have meant something.
Right.
And there's been absolutely zero remorse and zero accountability in this situation.
Would you tell us a little bit about what you know of what happened that night in talking to detectives and working with the state attorney's office?
Absolutely. So I feel like whenever situations like this happen, and unfortunately it seems like several, criminally based stories in our family have produced themselves, and I always find myself researching and figuring out the why and wanting to know everyone's perspective. I've talked to everyone from the investigators to Rachel's best friend, the getaway driver in the car who accidentally drove them away from the scene, to just everyone. I dived deep into these things, and in talking to the investigator, he said this is one of the most hate-based crimes that he had ever witnessed, because it was unnecessary. And it was like, you could have shot her once, you could have punched her and walked away. You just kept going, and you pulled it not once, not twice, but 10 times.
And there's video of it.
Absolutely.
You've seen that video. What does it show?
Absolutely. So we were not, allowed to see it for long. It was, turn around, glance at you. But the investigator who has seen it and studied it has told me, per detail, that there are 2 fights that break out, and one is amongst the males in a group setting, and the other is a few yards away with Tierra and Christian and Rachel, and you see them obviously communicating, conversing something, and then there starts to be a brawl between them, and eventually Christian hits her 3 times and knocks her to the ground, we presume unconscious. And so she, in the testimony of Rachel's best friend, looks like she's trying to cover her face, kind of in a crawling position, and then someone says she was kind of twisted and turned around trying to retreat from Christian, and then Rachel climbs on top of her. And I will say the video is much worse than I expected, because Rachel is just beating her. And, in Rachel's testimony, she said, Your Honor, I don't even know how to fight. She fought that night, and she fought Tierra beyond, her unconscious state. And then Christian pulls Rachel back, and then he climbs on top of her, and no difference in 2 to 3 feet, fires 10 bullets into her body, the base of her neck and the back.
So she died right there in the parking lot.
She did. Mm-hmm.
My goodness. And then we've since learned through talking to you and talking to all the very many people that you have, and I'm sure some of this evidence will come out in court, and maybe some of it already has, but we've talked about he admitted to police that he had been drinking that night and drug use as well.
So someone, related to me had actually told me that he was on cocaine that night. And so I don't want to disclose how they found out that information. I don't know what procedures, the police or the sheriff's department went through that night with him. I know that they did not drug test her, but I would like to think that he was drug tested. But I know that there's a very close friend of both of theirs that told me that she knew that they were both using cocaine.
Wow. And so do you think that could have potentially played a role in what they did?
I would think that, I've never used cocaine before, but I've been told that whenever you're drinking, you are in a more relaxed state, and then you're doing that cocaine, so you're getting that high. And I think if you're doing both, you have to wonder what somebody's state of mind is, because you're going through this high and then this low and then this high. And I think it alters your brain and it alters your actions, and you do things, and then you get back to this low and you're like, wow, what have I done? I told you guys, he called 911 and said, I think I'm in trouble. I think that was a low for him. And I think he mixed, two things that are very dangerous.
Upper and a downer. The cocaine's an upper and alcohol's a downer. And regardless of what he was taking or doing, if that evil wasn't inside of him, I don't think he would have done it. Because here's what they like to do, something we've been dealing with. They like to blame it on the drugs or what have you. We got people doing drugs all the time, left and right. But that still was his decision to do. He doesn't get to get up every morning and decide I'm fixing to kill me one girl at Mugs and Jugs parking lot tonight because I'm going to be using drugs and people will protect me and I can do what I want. You don't get to do that. That is the insult that's further. And you know how I call it? I don't call it the justice system. I call it the legal system because it is just a system. that we go through. And until you've been there, we're proper folks. We don't do this stuff. My mother did like they did on St. Elmo's Fire. She whispered the word prison. You know, she didn't say that kind of stuff or murder. But here we are. It's our vernacular. It's what we talk about. You know, savagely murder and heinous, barbaric, these words. I don't say those unless I'm writing something about something wicked.
Or you're watching some crime program on television, but this is part of your daily lives.
Right.
Well, and it all goes back to that accountability. I mean, even Rachel said, you know, Your Honor, I was intoxicated. I don't remember my actions. Well, you're the one who chose to partake in the alcohol that chose you know, to put you incoherent so you don't remember.
Right.
You made a choice, whether you made a choice consciously to beat her, you made a choice to consciously drink. You know, the state attorney's assistant did bring up the fact that she was above the legal limit that night. They took drinks into the Mugs and Jug parking lot. They, you know, were drinking before they arrived. They were drinking while they were driving. They, I mean, just chose to commit crimes that night.
Right. And I think that folks that can say that it was the drugs or it was their mental state, Tierra's not the currency for their ill-bredness or wrong choices or their diseases and stuff, just like my sister's not the currency for Brandon. But so many people can go there, and I'm like, do you realize how insulting that is to us to say somebody has to die? I've even had people tell me Sharon had to die for something else to happen. I mean, you know, Jesus has come. You know, we are regular mortals here. And so it's just people don't understand. It is a horrible journey, but we're taking it.
Well, and I think in talking about the accountability, I had to be prepared to accept my own accountability on Tierra's behalf if she had made choices that night that she shouldn't have. And people think that I'm, you know, negating her accountability, and I'm not. But the medical examiner was very thorough in her research and stating that Tierra's blood alcohol level was below 0. She said whenever you are post-mortem that it's concentrated in your blood. So if anything, it would be higher. And her number was almost non-existent. So she had a 0 blood alcohol level. And I think that speaks volumes because I had to prepare myself to accept if she had played some part in these bad choices. But I think that, you know, the research speaks for itself at this point.
And people do automatically judge, don't they, the circumstances, even though they don't know her or why she was there. There's this perception of, well, she was killed in the parking lot of a bar. She must be doing something she shouldn't have been doing. And and that's actually not the case, as we know from medical examiners, toxicology reports, and whether or not Christian and Rachel were doing drugs on top of drinking. Those are allegations, but it certainly was a difference in their behavior. And to see her shot down when she was really just trying to enjoy friends in a way that any 25-year-old's normal. I mean, this particular bar, Mugs and Jugs, is an attraction for local college kids. Those who aren't familiar with Pensacola, it's literally right outside the gate of the University of West Florida, one of the back entrances. So it's a common place for young people to go and wind down. And she had been busy. She's been working to rebuild her life. She was, as we talked about before, living in Pensacola because she felt like this was her best chance for getting into the military. She wanted a career in the military. She was working with a recruiter. Her husband and their children were in Virginia, I believe you said, where he was getting ready to get out of the military. So she was going to school full time, it sounds like, going and working and trying to do what she needed to do to get her body ready to qualify to get into the military. So of course, you're going to want to go out with your friends and have a good time. And she certainly wasn't doing anything to bring this on herself, is what it seems like to me. And has that been a bit of an uphill battle for you, just, I guess, dealing with people's incorrect perceptions of what happened?
Absolutely. I mean, it is any time that your family is a part of something so big. But, you know, we've talked about the state attorney silencing our family. And I think they can ask for silence all day long, but the people that are not going to be silent are the community and the public. And you don't hear people talk about, you know, Tierra and previous bars and Tierra and previous incidents, but you do hear them talk about Rachel and Christian in Seville a week prior, hitting a girl up in the side of her head with a beer bottle. And
who did that?
Rachel.
Wow.
And so you hear, you know, people that she went to middle school and high school. Wow, this has always been her behavior. This has always been her attitude. And, you know, I think it speaks volumes when the community is speaking out about the people that they know.
Well, and what's interesting about that, in September, Rachel pleaded no contest to that misdemeanor charge of battery, of beating Binion while she was unconscious, sentenced to 60 days in the Escambia County Jail, 12 months probation. She only served, about 7 weeks, and then they released her. and she had to write an essay on what she learned. I mean, it's hard to even say that without a little bit of just incredulousness coming out. And something as serious as being involved in a murder, to me, that does seem like a slap on the wrist.
Honestly, it felt like insult to injury. I mean, we've all watched Law and Order. We've all, followed people like you and other news reporters who, are advocating for crimes. And we hear of people's sentences, and people get more than that for drug charges. They get more than that for, simple violations. And it was insult to injury. I literally remember my mouth falling open and just thinking, oh my God, like, an essay? Like, we did that in 11th grade. You're not in an 11th grade setting. You're in court. And I think it speaks volumes yet again for this system here in Pensacola.
And you weren't expecting that. They had told you they were going to be asking for the maximum. Is that
the state attorney office, yes. She, the advocates group had consistently said, just let us do our job. Let us do our job. And then the state attorney's assistant had told us we're going to ask for the max sentencing, which is 364 days in the county jail. And as soon as I got done with my impact statement, and my mother did the same, they said, Your Honor, we have no recommendation for her sentencing. And so it's telling you one thing and doing another. And I think that, we've had this conversation several times about setting the standard for, crimes to come. And that's why these crimes continue to happen, because there's no example. There's no standard here.
Or deterrent or something like that. And I think about all of that if they would have told you, we're going to do 60 days, you can deal with what you have to deal with. It's like the expectation is different than what happened. We're new at this. Thank God. I wish we didn't have to go through it at all. But by speaking out, we can help other people and each other and stuff. But this legal system, most people don't have firsthand knowledge about it, unless it's just some little speeding ticket or something like that. It is a whole different world, and it makes me feel like I'm in Interplanet Janet in an alternate universe half the time. So I can imagine. And then, right here as we sit with Diamond, I'm thinking about how things were right with Sharon, how so confusing it is, and how there's so much advocacy for the criminal or the murderer. You're like,
about
hey,
their rights.
Right. My sister had the right to live. Scrub all theirs, man. Because it is, I'm just so proud of you. And my heart is just right there with you. And I know Molly's is too, because this is our passion project. And you are in a place where I pray many people don't have to be. And I pray for your strength and your fortitude to keep going for your sister.
Right. And being her voice, because you mentioned earlier how you feel like the state attorney's office has silenced you. And I did reach out. So folks know I did reach out to the state attorney's office, and I asked for a comment, particularly from the prosecutor that's been working on this case. And I did not receive a call back. So they did not respond to that. We have given them the opportunity. But in what ways do you feel like they have silenced you?
Well, I shared with you before that the advocates group specifically, and you have to separate the two, because the advocates group is one entity and the state attorney's office is another. But they work together.
Under the same
They do.
umbrella.
They work together. They're in the courtroom constantly together. They are informed of all of the proceedings and procedures and things that happen.
And they're supposed to inform you as well, because they are quote unquote victims advocates. You are the victim, because that was your sister that was killed. By law, they are supposed to inform you of the court dates. By law, they are supposed to keep you informed of what's happening with the process. And that really hasn't been happening. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but that's basically, I wanted folks listening in to understand that it was their job to do that. And in your opinion, they've not been doing that.
No. And so, I'm very familiar with advocate groups in the courtroom, whether it be CASA or some other type of advocate group, and just respecting what they do, because we don't have advocacy. And so I expected a lot from them, just the communication and, the representation of our family moving forward. And whenever I released a statement about what Christian and Rachel had done, they had told me, we're watching your social media. Trey is not happy with you.
And Trey is the prosecutor.
Trey is the prosecutor. And even told me that they didn't know that he would speak to me or allow me to be in the meeting with our family because of my voice on social media. They told me that I was compromising this case. And so it's interesting, though, the familiarity with the fact that all of this was said right before Rachel went before the judge, and not much has been said post. her sentencing, and not much has been said, prior to his sentencing. It seemed like it was like they were in favor of Rachel's family and just trying to get me to be quiet and,
well, and just the inconsistency of telling you they were going to do one thing and then the other.
Absolutely.
My mind would immediately wonder, okay, did you want me to be quiet because you did have something else in mind? And that's why you told me you were going to do one thing and then you didn't do another.
Right.
And then what really struck me, and you talked about the social media part of it, but when you did have that meeting with the state attorney's office and that prosecutor, Trey, that he wouldn't even speak directly to you. You would speak and ask a question. He wouldn't look at you. And he would basically, through the other people in the room, the victim's advocate, say, speak to them. Well, I'm not talking to her because somebody's been talking about this on social media. That is unbelievably unprofessional to me. You can't even, they're making it personal.
My dad was a lieutenant colonel in the Marine Corps. Many years of just analyzing people and seeing people's body language and their speech. He also majored as an English major. And so he's just well equipped to just watch people's behavior. And being in that meeting, both him and my mother said any time that you would speak up or ask a question, he was uncomfortable. He would, sit back in his chair, look around at anybody but me. And I was at one end, he was at the other. Our families lined at the sides. And it just seemed like he was almost threatened by my questions and by the advocacy that I was trying to give.
Yes, and I do wonder, because I do think that when it comes to the justice system, people ideally will be going into it because they care about representing and putting criminals away, or if they're defenders, they care about representing people who have been, giving them a fair defense, whether they committed the crime or not. But in this case, it seems like you were just sort of, I feel like sometimes these state attorneys folks feel like, well, there's nobody else but us who's looking over our shoulder. We're doing what we think's best. Who are you to question us?
Right.
And in some cases, they may be right on, but in other cases, they may not, or maybe they just need to clarify to the people that they're working with about the cases. But I do feel like that there's often a disconnect between the people they're supposed to represent and their office. And I don't know if it's a level of arrogance. I don't know if it's a level of, this is the way we've always done it. We don't want to do it any other way. How dare you question us? And I'm not saying that's what happened in this case, but I have covered enough cases to know that it really does depend on the prosecutor or the defender as to the level of passion and work that they put into a case. And it sounds like you don't feel like, or it's hard for you to trust that they care enough to really hold Christian Ketchup accountable in light of how they essentially gave Rachel a pass.
Right. And it almost feels like belittling behavior. I shared with you that I was in a separate case in an adoption trial this week in Mississippi. And I had to stand up, and I was forced to represent myself in the courtroom after our federal attorney backed out. And I just had to stand up and say, I'm not here because this is fun. This is not fun. It is hard. Whether you're advocating for foster care, whether you're advocating for, my sister's murder and justice to be served, it's not fun. I'm tired of driving to Pensacola. I'm tired of being in a courtroom with the people that murdered my sister. It's not because I'm getting a kick out of it. I'm not here to undermine their authority and what it is that they do and their job. I can't do their job. They probably can't advocate the way that I can. We're all good at something. But I have a duty to Tierra, and I have, a responsibility to be her voice. And it just feels so belittling whenever someone's constantly attacking you and saying, you need to stay off social media. You need to let us do our job. Well, I trusted you to do your job, and you didn't, because Rachel got out in 45 days when she beat someone unconscious and her boyfriend murdered her, and they both run away in a car and leave. I had to tell her attorney, she didn't even call 911. The man who murdered her did. And so that speaks volumes, to be with somebody who created such a heinous crime that you don't even think, wow, I should probably call 911, even if I am going to be in trouble. You just get in a car and you leave with him.
I think about that a lot with folks. There's so many stories we do on Gulf Coast Confidential that they didn't call 911. They wouldn't call 911. And that seems like such a simple, easy thing to do. So the bigger picture to me here is, who thinks it's okay to have a conflict and you just kill somebody or punch them unconscious or you lay them down on the ground or you take their life? Who thinks that? We've got to do better. And the only way for that to happen is for there to be some consequences of that. Because, this is a totally different thing. I'm just going to dip it in here real quick. The thing with Luigi Mangione and Brian Thompson. There are some people that are celebrating that. A man was shot in the back, no matter what he did. We don't kill each other to make
It's
things
not
happen.
supposed to be a legal
Right.
resolution, and to come up with a story in order to justify that. What is the latest that you hear about Christian Ketchup, that his family, I know there's been a number of delays, and part of it is because they wanted to hire someone essentially to evaluate him, and it looks like there was some back and forth about whether or not that was going to happen, and now the court has decided that can move forward.
So the last hearing that I attended, I was the only other person in the courtroom other than the advocates group and Christian Ketchup and a couple of other people who were waiting for the docket that day. But essentially, his attorney had motioned the court for a self-defense expert a year ago, last October. And the judge approved it, said, if you want a self-defense attorney to analyze the DNA and, represent you in the courtroom, fine. So the judge approves it a year ago. And here we are waiting on trial. And the judge has to say, I approved this motion a year ago. Why have you not hired anyone? Mm-hmm. And he said, well, Your Honor, it's only been a couple of months ago. And the state attorney's office had to produce files, and evidence in their motion stating, no, this was last October. And here we are in November. And the judge was, pretty adamant about the fact that that was pretty negligent on the attorney's side of things. And what it is essentially is that they're trying to hire the self-defense expert to prove that Tierra's fingerprints were on an additional gun that was found on the ground yards away from her. And when the judge asked, well, what's the holdup? Why have we not hired him? Mm-hmm. And he said his family cannot afford it at this time. I couldn't afford the $12,000 that it took to bury Tierra. Mm-hmm. Tierra's still without a headstone. Mm-hmm. These things are costly, but it's not, a burden for us to bear on a lack of your trial because your family can't afford to hire an expert. Mm-hmm. And so the judge told him, you've got 2 weeks, from this date to find someone. And I just checked the record the other day, and he had asked for an extension on that motion. So
yeah, I can see why you would lose a little bit of faith and wondering Absolutely. What's coming around the corner next. Would you mind telling us a little bit about just that you're so experienced at advocacy, and it's almost like, and I know you're a Jesus girl, and I am, we all are as well, but it does seem like the Lord has put a lot in your path to advocate for, and you already have a nonprofit. Where you're advocating for foster children. I would love it if you could tell folks who are listening a little bit about what you do.
Absolutely. So a couple of years ago, a friend and myself kind of just were brainstorming about our county up in Alabama, Monroe County, Alabama, and the lack of resources that foster families and foster children have. And so we kind of brainstormed and talked to some, public officials, some politicians, and said, would you be opposed to us creating this nonprofit? So we called it the Alabama Advocacy Agency, where we would try to advocate for other foster families going through, the same scenarios that we were. And in that, we've been able to help several different families who've needed advocacy but haven't had it because they don't know where to start or they don't know what to do next. And so I currently have custody of a relative placement. I've got 2 pending adoption trials coming. Advocacy is important for me, and I wish that people had advocated for me the way I try to advocate for others. And like I said, it's not fun. It takes time. It's time consuming. But, I'm just trying to give back to people what I wish that I had in scenarios like Tierra's case.
And I would love it if folks those who are interested in following you and learning more about what you do, whether it's advocating for foster children or advocating for Tierra, you share a lot on your social media page. Is that the best place for people to learn more about you and to show their support?
I think so. I know social media can be controversial, but I've really learned, there was a time where I was quiet on social media and not so much anymore. I've learned it's the best avenue. It's free. I've had many people like yourself reach out to me and just say, hey, I want to help you. I want to advocate for you. I want to be here for you. And I can't imagine where I'd be without people like, both of you and others that have done that. So,
and they can search Diamond Jordan.
Absolutely.
And find you.
Diamond Claire Jordan on Facebook. I share a lot about Tierra's story, a lot about foster care, and situations that are similar.
Any stories that you would like to share about Tierra so that people can know the kind of person that she was?
Absolutely. Well, I told you earlier, today is my daughter's 13th birthday, and she had just told me, Mom, I want to share this video, but will you read the caption first? And she had me in tears, just talking about how Tierra was like her big sister, even though she was her aunt. And I think that speaks volumes to Tierra's character and the fact that she was like a big sister to everyone. She went through a lot in this lifetime, but she never ceased to be present for other people. And people advocating for her and sharing stories about her always seem to revert back to the fact that she just always did so much for them, whether it was a phone call or, an act of love or kindness. She was always there for other people. And it's crazy to me that, she can be here and helping others and then gone. So.
And on some level, you feel like she may have even known, or certainly God knew what was around the corner. You found a letter that she had written in her room.
Absolutely. So on social media, I do share my impact statement. And within that impact statement, you can find a letter that my mother and I found when we went to her apartment where she was staying. She didn't have much in that apartment. It wasn't a permanent place for her. She was hoping to join the military, but she had a few things in a devotional. And inside that devotional was a letter that she had written 8 days before she was murdered, just asking God for help and to come back into her life as she had tried to be there for others and try to do things on her own. So she was definitely preparing herself, and I think the Lord was as well.
Did that bring you some comfort?
Absolutely. I don't really share this often or, share my faith often. And obviously this is an opportunity to do so. So I will just let you know, I had a dream the other day where I came across Tierra on a road that I was driving down, and I, freaked out. Here my sister is, she's supposed to be murdered. Here she is in front of me. And I looked over her whole body, and having been in that funeral home and touched the bullet holes in her head and her back, I just remember touching those same places on her and, why do you not have holes in your body? And she said, I'm whole now and I'm healed. And I just have to rely on that and the fact that the Lord has healed her and made her whole again.
Oh, goodness, girl, you'll make me cry. Goodness, I know that, but that is comforting, and it's hard. It's hard to lose somebody under the best of circumstances.
Absolutely.
But yes, is there anything else that you would like to share? Again, this is a show about advocating for victims. And even if folks haven't lost someone to a violent crime in their own life, this is also about knowing that people aren't walking a road alone. Mm-hmm. And I imagine you've had a lot of people that come up to you and want to share their own stories too.
Absolutely.
And is there any words of advice that you would give to others who are dealing with grief or dealing with injustice?
Well, these are two totally separate situations, but in foster care, we like to say, adopt if you can. And if you can't adopt, foster. And if you can't foster, educate. And if you can't educate, like, share, comment, put yourself out there in support of those that are doing what they can. And so that's what I would say. People have done a great job of rallying behind our family and sharing the posts that, you and others have produced, sharing her story. And if you can't be a part of it, you can read them and you can help educate your children and educate others and advocate to your own family. And it starts in our homes. And I think about Christian and Tierra's life is gone, but his is too. Mm-hmm. And I have to wonder what happened in his life to make him think that those actions were okay. And in Rachel's life, to think that those actions were okay. So I try to do what I can in my home, and I strongly urge others to do so in theirs.
Absolutely.
I think forgiveness was one thing that helped me a lot. Not necessarily that it absolves the consequences and stuff. And you spend a lot of time getting back into your faith because that is all there is. The day that Sharon was killed, the night, I fell to my knees and looked to the sky and said, what in your name good? Because that's what I've been taught, that he is a good father.
All things work together for good.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Definitely.
There's a family in our church who lost their child in a car accident the other day, their oldest child. And I don't really reach out to people in their time of need just because I know how overwhelming it is. But I did reach out to this mom and just tell her, I've met the Lord in this last year and a half closer than I have ever. My dad was a preacher. He taught he preached at First Baptist Church, and I went to pre-K there. And I just think about the moments that I've met him so much stronger in this year and a half than I ever have. And so you really do. You meet him in those darkest moments.
He doesn't necessarily take the pain away, but he makes it so you can live with it.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Any final words?
I just say stay in your heart and just keep doing the next right thing the best you can and give people the grace and mercy that they need, but never stop.
Absolutely. And we won't stop, certainly covering this case and following what happens and seeing what happens with Christian's trial. Any final comments, Diana?
Well, I would like to thank the both of you. I know that it's a lot to put yourself out here and reach out to these people, but, I shared with my husband the other day, I can't imagine the people who don't have the funds and the resources and the education that they need to advocate for themselves. Here I am doing it, but it's been hard, and I can't imagine the families who don't have that advocacy. So thank you both very much.
Well, thank you, Diamond.
Thank you.
Wonderful. And we appreciate you for joining us. That is it for New to Murder. Christian Ketchup accused of killing Tierra Binion in cold blood. Victim's sister is her voice. I'm your host, writer, and producer, Molly Barrows, with co-host and researcher Pam Hill. And a big thanks, as always, to our director, editor, and production engineer, James Roy. Remember, you can listen to more of our Gulf Coast Confidential conversations wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And you can also watch right here on the Gulf Coast Confidential YouTube channel. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.